Okay, so it was a spring night. I want to say it would have been 2018. And I was working campus safety at Keystone College at the time, which we had a little bit of downtime. Let's put it that way. We had many nights of kind of wandering around, exploring the buildings, and some creepy stuff had happened here and there, like, some lights turn on, you hear a noise, you feel something, whatever. There's all kinds of that stuff. It's a very old, very spooky campus. So one night it happened that me and my two coworkers, Officer Fetzko and Officer Conklin, were hanging out with some of the students in the local smoking gazebo. And as we were all sitting there bullshitting, the topic of the campus being haunted came up, as it very typically did. And we're sitting there talking. It was me and my two coworkers. It was my friend Jess, who's on this call right now. It was our other friend Alex, who I haven't seen in a while, but she was a nice addition to the team when she was around. It was my girlfriend Gwen. It was our other friend John, and our other friend Liam. So it's a bunch of people crammed into this little gazebo that's maybe designed for like 3 or 4 people. So the thing I remember about it that I really will always stick with me, it was so tight in that gazebo, like we're sitting ass cheek to ass cheek next to each other in this gazebo. And I was sitting next to John, and then Liam was on the other side, whatever. And Officer Fetzko, Dave, had brought up how the light next to that area would flicker when like people were upset or something like that. And somebody else was like, yeah, I've noticed the same thing. People are kind of jumping on the story. And John just steps in and he's like, that's ridiculous. How stupid are you guys for believing that? It's just an old light on a beaten down, crappy campus. So we keep talking, and the subject of the buildings being haunted came up. And once again, John was like, there's no such thing as ghosts. Like, you guys are just stupid for believing that. And he's just dumping on everything we're trying to say. So as we're sitting there, a stiff gust of wind blows through the smoke gazebo, the butt hut as it's called. And sure enough, we all felt the wind, but the only person that got a lapful and a faceful of cigarette ash was John. And as I said, we were sitting this close to each other. But Liam was completely clean. I was completely clean. But John was covered in cigarette butts and ashes. And we all saw it, and we all looked at each other. And he was the only one that was like, no, it's just a coincidence. Like, you guys are reading into it. You're trying to make me believe in ghosts. But we all saw it. We all watched it happen. So in the course of the conversation, because as I mentioned, we had a little bit of downtime on this job some nights. We were sitting there talking for quite a while. And Alex eventually said, like, hey, like, when you guys go to other buildings on campus tonight, can I come with you? Like, I want to see if any of these places give me a bad vibe. So we go through the campus. You go through the library, nothing particularly interesting happens. We go through the infamous Ward Hall. That's a story for another night. Nothing really happens. Capwell, the science building, whatever, nothing happens. But then we went up to the Art Center, and it was a distinctly different feeling. And Alex and Jess, who had come with us, immediately noticed that something was a little bit off. And it seemed to be centered on a painting that was on the second floor of the room. And maybe I'll be able to upload a picture of this if I can fight through the red tape of the administration and get permission to post it. But I'll just describe what the room looks like. Before it was an art center, before it was a design studio, it was a gym. And you can see the checkered floor and some of the old equipment. And up on the second floor, it's just a wooden track from years and years ago. Probably like 30 some laps to a mile kind of thing. My shins are devastated just thinking about it years later. But up on that catwalk, there were closets where the art students would keep their paints and their easels and all their shit, basically. And there's one art student who stood out among all the rest. And her name was Mikayla Lewis. And she had done a self-portrait the previous semester as part of her senior showcase. It was one of her big things. And it was a very lifelike painting of her in the studio painting, as it happens. And she's standing there in the image holding this toy skeleton that she always kept nearby, just doing what she's doing. When we walked in the room, the way that painting was set up, when you opened the door to the studio, if you looked up at the catwalk, it was looking down at you. And the eyes of that painting were really creepy. It's almost like if you ever go in a big church, and no matter where you're sitting in that church, Jesus is looking directly at you. That's how the painting was. And as soon as Alex saw it, she was really creeped out. So needless to say, she went up on the catwalk and went up to the painting and was kind of poking around, trying to get some kind of vibe, whatever. So while this is happening, I looked at my watch and realized the shift was almost over. And knowing that Keystone doesn't pay for overtime, I said to Alex and Jess, guys, we got to leave. We got to come back another time. And they said, fine, whatever. So we went back. A couple of days later, we decide we're going to set this up. We're going to get all our work done a little bit early so we have a couple minutes to go up there and just see what will happen. So on this night, it was another very large group. It was an ensemble cast where it was my two coworkers and I. It's Jess, it's John, it's Gwen, it's Alex, and it's Alex's ex-fiance, Shannon. And we're all sitting up in the butt hut behind the art center, you know, a couple people are smoking, laughing, telling stories. And we go in the building, we're in the drawing studio, and we're all just kind of standing there like idiots. You know, like somebody turns off the lights. So here's like 7 or 8 of us just standing in the hallway of this building, like looking at each other. And we're there for maybe a minute. And John goes, is something going to happen or are we just going to fucking stand here? So needless to say, we stood there for another minute. And then Alex says, you know, I don't think this is the right approach to take. I think if there's any kind of spirit in this building, it's not going to come out when there's this big group of us hanging around. Why don't we split up? So she says to Jess, how about if me and you go over in the ceramics room, the rest of you guys go back out to the butt hut, we'll let you know if anything happens. So we all leave, and Alex and Jess go in that ceramics room. The rest of us walk out, go around the back of the parking lot, whatever. And we're sitting there. And 5 minutes go by. You know, we lock some other buildings. We're like patrolling the campus, whatever. We come back. They still haven't come out. They're still in there. And after maybe 20, 25 minutes, John looks at me and he's like, what are they doing? Like, it's 11 o'clock at night. Like, what the hell are they waiting for? There's no ghosts on this campus. Like, you guys are nuts. So we continue to sit there and talk. And all of a sudden, Alex comes sprinting out. And I just want to emphasize, Alex was not a person to run. Alex was a very heavy smoker at the time. And to see her run, that was the first and only time I saw Alex run. And she was freaking out. She was like, Steve, you need to come in here right now. I can't believe this. You know, you have to come in here. You got to come in here. So I look at her and then I look at everybody else sitting there and they're all like, okay, go with them, see what happens. So I go in with them. And before I get to that part, I'm going to turn that part of this story over to Jess because she was there. You know, I'm joining this in progress. Just to give everyone some background of the ceramics studio at Keystone, there's lore behind it that there's a small Native American girl who is seen there sometimes, you know, like a ghost Indian girl, whatever. And there are all kinds of urban myths around Keystone. If you were just to walk around the dorms, you would hear 100 different stories. You'd hear 20 versions of the same thing, and none of them is true. That's just the way it goes in any kind of spooky place like that. So there is lore that there's a little Indian girl whose spirit is in that studio. And many students have been in there late at night and have heard stuff moving, have heard somebody laughing. The weirdest one I ever heard was that they were in there working. They were doing a ceramics project the night before the midterm or something like that. They're up all night, they're marathoning it. And in the middle of the night, they just hear somebody singing up on the catwalk. And they look and there's nothing. It's just the thin air. And there's lots of stories that surround it to that effect. So that's why they went in that room in the first place. It kind of had a special connotation to it. So what happened was I went in there with Alex and I could feel a heaviness in the air. It's kind of like that episode of SpongeBob when he goes to rock bottom and he says to Patrick, it's not just darkness, it's advanced darkness. That's the only way I can describe it, as cheesy as it is. It was palpable. You could feel it closing in as soon as you walk in that shitty little aluminum door. So I walk in the room and Jess is sitting on the table and Alex sits down next to her and she's like, just stand by the doorway if you're not comfortable or come sit with us. So I wasn't comfortable, so I stood by the doorway. And I think that's where I'll turn it over to Jess and let her talk about it.
All right, so after everybody had gone outside, we were trying to figure out what the best approach would be with the knowledge that we had been given, especially since a lot of people have all kinds of stories about that. So we didn't really want to go in thinking we knew what was going to happen because we already had our theories. And when we had gone in the first time, the time between we left there and when we got back in those couple of days later, every single day, Alex was like, something is not right. Something is wrong. And it's not just one of those things. It's one of those things that you get when you've been through bad stuff and you can anticipate it coming. And we both had similar situations like that. So I agreed with her. So when we had gone in there, we tried to think of a game plan and she's looking around. It's super dark, super dark. The lights outside barely illuminate anything unless you're on that top floor. So where you actually spin your pots and your clay is super dark. And she's just steady looking around in every single corner for a significant period of time. We just kind of sat there in silence, kind of to just get the general feel for the room, see how lights were going to refract on things and stuff like that, because there's a little driveway that goes by right there and kids go by there all the time. So you can see their headlights come in, and sometimes that type of stuff messes with your eyeballs. So we wanted to see how stuff like that was going to look, see how mechanical sounds were going to sound echoing from other rooms or within that room, to see okay, that's an HVAC unit in the other room going off, or somebody decided they were going to put a clay pot too close to the edge of a table and a car drove by super fast and it vibrated it and fell off, that type of stuff. So we're thinking, all right, they're saying there's a small Native American girl in here. Let's try to go off of that knowledge and see if we can ask some questions and maybe get an answer, because that rarely ever happens. So we both kind of just sit, and Alex decides, is there anybody there? Would be a good opener. Silence for a little bit. And she is steady staring into the one corner. It's the complete opposite corner from when you walk in. So there's I think there's a little sink there. One of those the word just went right out of my head. What am I thinking? What are they called? All the stuff that would be by a sink is over there. And then I think there's one of those locker things over there too. So it kind of creates this weird little enclosed nook. And when we were trying to get the general vibe of the room and see where lights were reflecting and stuff like that, no light touches that area, at all. And she just grabs my arm very tightly and says, there's a shadow over there moving back and forth, as if somebody is peeking to see, like a child would if they were hiding from somebody they were afraid of. I couldn't see anything, but she could. Now I was a little bit prepped at a flashlight. So that comes on to try to see what the general area was, because we couldn't see it because it was pitch black in there. And she rushes right over and she looks, and there's nothing there. No vibes, no shadows, just the sink, paper towels, a little locker. She opens the locker and looks inside. Nothing in there except pottery things. Closes that, comes back and sits down, and we start asking questions again. If there's anybody here, would you like to come forward and talk to us, maybe answer some questions? We know that there are possibly 1 to 2 other entities here. If you know anything about them, we would like to know that information as well. And some silence. Nothing. For a long time. Alex is getting jittery. She doesn't like long sustained silence where you can't even hear the cars going by outside. So she stands up and she starts getting like frustrated that there's no answers for any of the questions. I'm trying to tell her to calm down. Like, you can't just ask open-ended questions to something that might not have a voice. You have to ask yes or no, and you have to ask, 1 for no, 2 for yes, knocks, creaks, whatever. So that's what she decides to do. She's like, well, if there's anybody fucking here, it'd be great if you could answer. And we hear from upstairs. Again, she's strong as shit. She grabbed my arm. Did you hear that? Yes, I did. So she sits back down. We want to know who's here. Is it the little girl? And we hear the creak again. And we establish 1 for no, 2 for yes. Are you the little girl? And there was nothing for a really long time. And then we got 2 creaks. And that really freaked her out. She wanted to leave. She wanted to get out of there. And I told her, this never happens. We have to stay. We have to continue asking questions. Like, this is what like every ghost hunter's dreams are made of, to finally get an answer, a response, something that is like physically impossible to happen otherwise. So we keep asking, if you're not the little girl, are you one of the other people that's allegedly in here? And we get the 1 creak for yes. And she kind of keeps racking her brain for questions to ask. Things like, are you and the girl friends? Are you a protector? Are you safe to be around? Who are you? And the more like yeses and nos that we got, tried to get a vibe for who we might be conversating with. And the answers started to become mixed. Something that we thought might have been safe in the beginning ended up being not so nice. The vibe in the room in the beginning was a little bit sketch, because humans don't like when it's pitch black and they can't see their surroundings. You already have the hairs on the back of your neck on end. But it was a friendly environment in the beginning. But the more that we asked questions and the more Alex decided to provoke it, the not so nice feelings started to come in. And that is what started to make it worse. And we had finally asked, do you want to hurt us? And we got a really long creak for yes. A really long creak. And we had started asking questions about other students that have had similar stories that this entity seems to favor. And that definitely pissed it off even more, where it was just, the creaking sounded like somebody was like slamming on it. Very adamant that those people belonged to it, that nobody else could talk about them or be associated with them in any way. And I'm pretty sure that's when she decided that she needed to run outside and get Steve, since we got really not so nice answers. And I was in there by myself for about 3 minutes, and that was horrifying, because it felt like I was being crowded. And anybody who's a woman will know what that feeling is like when you get unwanted male attention, where they start crowding you to make you feel trapped and alone and there's no way to go. And I was trying to get myself like towards the door, and it felt like something went like this, and my necklace snapped clean off in that meantime. So when Alex and Steve came in, thank God, that was the best feeling in the world. And we decided to prove to Steve that there was, in fact, something in there that was responding to us. And I think we repeated some of the same questions that we had asked when you weren't there. Like, is there somebody in here? You were shocked as shit when something creaked, and we had a few answers out of them. I don't remember exactly all the questions that we asked. But at that point, we had decided we need to go and investigate what's creaking. So we go up a little spiral staircase and try to determine like which floorboards creak when you step on them, how heavy of a person you would have to be in order to make them creak. And there's like a little like metal railway at the back end of the room, and there's a door that leads from that walkway into that corner. So you would have to step right on like those two floorboards right there, really hard for them to creak. So whatever this was pissed off from the beginning, because like I can barely make the floorboards creak. So this was a big bitch, and he had some shit to say, and he wanted us to know, or it wanted us to know that it was there, and it was very upset that we were asking questions. So we figured that out, and we're trying to see, like, get vantage points as to where it would have been standing to look at us and see and answer our questions. And all I could think about was, first of all, you bastard, you broke my necklace? Like, you're that angry? You're gonna put your hands on me and show everybody that you're here? But of course, that goes away when everybody that was outside comes inside.
What I remember very clearly about when I first walked in there, Jess was just kind of sitting there quietly. Alex was in a panic. She was freaking out. And that kind of thing is obviously very contagious. So I naturally start freaking out too. And I settled down after a little bit, and Alex said something like, "There's somebody standing in that corner by the sink." And I remember looking in the general vicinity of the sink, and the only way I could describe it, it looked like puffy black flowing hair, like as if like if you watched The Grudge, like what the monster looked like in that movie, like if she had her back turned, it's just long black hair in the corner. And it was extremely dark. It was hard to penetrate, whatever. So that went away, and I'm just thinking like, okay, I'm freaking myself out. They've freaked themselves out. You know, this shit's not happening, because that has to be your kind of attitude when you go into these things. So Alex is like, we've been asking questions and it's been responding. I said, okay, well, ask it some questions. So they sit down, they start asking questions again, and it starts answering. And the first time it creaked, I was thinking like, oh, there's like a rat or something up there, like the squirrel came in, any kind of explanation. And then it started happening consistently, where they were getting a couple of answers that like, it wasn't my imagination. We're all looking at each other, like our hands are right in front of each other. No one's moving. There's no one else in the building. It's locked for the night. I locked it because I was the security guard. The three of us are the only ones there. And after a couple minutes, Alex says to me, "Do you want to ask some questions?" So I'm freaking the fuck out at this point. Make no mistake. And I had my own ideas about what was in that building. Once again, perhaps a story for another night. And I was very on edge, and I asked it if it knew certain people. I was naming people. Do you know who this is? Do you know who I am? And I'm just not getting anything. I'm not getting any kind of response. So I stop, And Alex asks it something and it responds like right away. So I'm thoroughly starting to freak out. I'm looking at my watch, the shift is almost over. And, you know, the reality is like I got to go home pretty soon. So I said that, I was like, guys, we got to like wrap this up here. So Alex says, okay, whatever. And as we're getting ready to leave, I remember very clearly, we looked up into the corner, like we heard something up above. Something where that floorboard was creaking, there was movement of some kind. And I looked up and I could see just a shadow go across the catwalk and make a left. There was like a ventilator duct. And then it was just gone. You know, it was a bang bang split second kind of deal. So we leave. And, you know, we take Alex and Jess back to their dorm, whatever. You know, we take John and we take everybody away. We take everybody home, basically. It's just me, Dave, and Conklin at this point. And they're both very skeptical. They're both like, it's really weird that they only wanted you to come in with them and not everybody else. Like, they're trying to pull something on you. They're trying to fleece you, as it were. And I was like, yeah, I don't know, but maybe. So I said to Dave, how about tomorrow night when we come to work? Why don't we go up on that catwalk and poke around? Because as Jess had pointed out, when they went up there, I stayed downstairs. I was freaking out. I wasn't walking up that little spiral staircase. It's like something you see in a submarine, like it's super narrow and like it goes in the, and it's, I wasn't going up that. Not in total darkness with a potential malevolent being hanging out 10 feet away. I passed on that. So it was just them that went upstairs and found the creaky floorboard. So my coworkers and myself are thinking, okay, they're pulling some kind of hoax. It's bullshit, whatever. Let's find out. So we go in the next day and we're poking around up on the second floor. We're like checking in the lockers for stuff because there's lockers, there's stacks of books, there's newspapers from the 90s hanging out up there, like dusty old, very freaky pottery people have made, like just junk, just garbage stuff, basically. And we're going along, I'm looking for the spot that's making the noise, that's making that creak that Jess was describing. And I tried all the floorboards on that little floor. There was one little floorboard where a piece was missing, just enough that it lifted up. And I'm talking it lifted up maybe this much. Okay, it wasn't really noticeable unless you're looking for it. I probably stepped over it 1,000,000 times before and never thought about it. So when I stepped on it, it didn't make any noise. But when I jumped on it and put all my weight on it, it made the exact noise we had heard so many times the night before. And at that point, I just felt that chill go down my spine. And I look at Dave and I'm like, dude, they weren't making that up. That happened. That's exactly what I heard last night. And it wasn't random. It was answering their questions very clearly. So he kind of came around on it a little bit. The last part of this story happened a few weeks later because Alex kind of became obsessed with it after this happened. It was something that she kept asking me, when can we go in again? When can we go in again? When can we go in again? Every time I saw her. Well, you know, it was kind of a busy time of the year, like the college semesters, you know, when they pick up, there's a lot of shit on campus. I can't just take a half an hour and go ghost hunting when I'm at work. So this goes on for a couple weeks. And finally, we get a Saturday. And it was me and my girlfriend, Gwen, and it was Alex and her ex-fiance, Shannon. And we finally set it up where we're going to go in there like the last 15, 20 minutes tonight. We're going to go in there about 11:30 tonight and see what happens. So all four of us go in. And Alex and Shannon go in the ceramics room and sit down on the tables like Alex and Jess had done a few weeks earlier. Me and Gwen are kind of standing in the entranceway. Now, she's a very skeptical person. She is the most devout skeptic, the most hardened atheist that I know. So she's like, you know, there's nothing here. There's no ghosts. Like, whatever, you're fine. One of her famous lines is, if there's a demon, I'll protect you. You know, she means well. So we're standing in the little entryway. and nothing happens for a minute. And the way that that building's set up, there's a narrow hallway that wraps around the rooms that I've been describing. And there's like these big aluminum doors that block it off. It's very old. It's very I don't want to say shitty looking, but it's the only way to describe it. And we're standing between two of these big aluminum doors. So there's like the door here, the hallway, then the other door a couple feet further over. Can't get it to line up with the camera. And Alex goes in and starts asking questions. And she just says, "Is somebody here?" And when she says this, I hear something moving down the hallway off to my left. And I feel a cold breeze go right by my face. You know, like I feel it tickle my beard kind of thing. And then I just hear a loud, like, creak as if something had just bumped into the little hinge on the door. And I just lost my shit at that point, and I was like, I'm going outside. You guys could do whatever you want. I'm going outside. So none of the other three didn't experience that. They didn't hear or feel anything. But when they saw how freaked out I was, we called that one within minutes. And that was that. So there's lots of other stories of the Keystone Art Center that, you know, are perhaps for another night. But that was the main one that I was involved with and Jess was involved with that made me believe very much that there's something in there. There's something that, you know, doesn't want us to poke around, doesn't want us to ask questions.